So 2 years ago, this was actually the last crypto conference I was at, and I gave a talk about the coming liquidity wars in DeFi. And this was pre-comp farming, so we didn't have like crazy incentives. And one of the things I talked about then was the idea of these kind of symbiotic DeFi protocols. So combining AMMs and lending pools. And my thesis at the time was that we were going to start to see this happen in the form of super protocols where it was all very deeply integrated. What's happened is we're starting to see that, but it's not deeply integrated. It's actually happening through the composability of DeFi. And so today we've got a number of protocol founders up here who have effectively created a DeFi prime brokerage out of combining together all of their different protocols. So one of the core concepts here was something that I termed a while ago of superfluid collateral. So the idea of being able to take, say, deposit tokens from something like Compound and put them in an AMM, or use the LP shares from an AMM as collateral to take out a loan. And we're starting to see how some of those primitives are being used here to build up to some really interesting, really complex, under the hood financial products, but things that actually make really amazing benefits for end users without having to dive down at the retail level. So first, I want to introduce Fernando Martinelli. He's the founder and CEO of Balancer Labs. Fernando, want to tell us about Balancer and some of the issues that you saw with AMMs and what Balancer's latest iteration does to open up more composability?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Dan. So Balancer V1 we launched in 2020. It was, it still is, like a product. It's like an index fund AMM where you can have up to 8 tokens, different weights, any swap fee you want. So it's very flexible. You can have exposure to 40% MKR, 20% DAI, and whatever, how many tokens you want. But it's not like really flexible in its logic. So you can't really adapt your AMM logic for specific tokens like stablecoins and give more liquidity around price one. So we realized that there's no such thing as a one-size-fits-all solution for AMMs. It's gonna depend on the niche, on the use case, on the tokens. So we created Balancer V2, we launched last year, which really opens up the design space for amazing people like these guys to create the next generation AMMs on top of Balancer. Not only AMMs, but programmable liquidity. So any sort of protocol or smart contract that has 2 or more tokens that needs to swap them under given circumstances, you can do that on Balancer V2. So yeah, it's going to be fun to discuss this.
So in my opinion, and I am biased, Nascent is invested in Balancer, but Balancer is probably the most flexible AMM in terms of what you can do with it. What that needs, though, is a really flexible lending protocol to pair with. So, Jay, talk to us about Rari Capital and Fuse.
Yeah, I mean, how I look at it is DeFi is heading towards permissionlessness, right? It's like we started with the DEXs of Ether, Delta, Radar Relay, permissioned assets. Then Uniswap came around and made it so that you could trade anything. We're doing the same with lending and borrowing, right? You started with Compound and Aave, where you could lend and borrow specific assets under specific risk parameters, under the rules of their token holders or their corporations, right? And that's not so dissimilar from the bank. Rari Capital is about making it so you can lend and borrow anything on your terms, right? Not on the other people's terms, not on token holders' terms, not on the bank's terms, but you can start your own pool with whatever assets, whatever risk parameters, whatever you want, and with whatever assets you want, right? And that's what's cool about the integrations here, is you're gonna be able to put Balancer tokens, your BPTs inside of Fuse. You're able to do a lot of really complex stuff by enabling you to really lend and borrow anything in the world.
And I'm very excited about Fuse and what Rari Capital has been doing. When I first saw Fuse, I thought it was just gonna be a more degen version of Compound or Aave. I didn't get it. And what has clicked to me is that it's not about somebody coming in and saying, I'm going to cram every imaginable asset into the same pool. it really is about saying there's a specific focus for this pool, and it's being used specifically by another protocol or DAO in some way. So, Kenton, from Sense, can you tell us a little bit about what Sense is and the ways in which you're making use of Fuse and also Balancer?
Sure. So Sense is a permissionless fixed income protocol that allows builders to create new yield primitives, such as bond-like assets, tranches, yield tokens, etc. The overall goal of Sense, at least in the short term and long term, is to build out the pillars of fixed income. And what we've seen until this point is that there have been protocols that have focused on one pillar or the other, but Sense is really taking an ambitious approach to capture all of those pillars. The pillars are issuance and redemption of these bond-like assets. The next pillar is exchange, and the third one is borrowing and lending of these yield primitives. When we initially sketched out the design of Sense, it became very clear to us that we did not want to spend an enormous amount of R&D rebuilding the wheel. And it was very clear that there has been like massive value and great infrastructure built at Balancer and Fuse that we could effectively leverage and sit on top of. So that's what Sense is doing. We have Sense Space. It's an AMM pool built on top of Balancer V2, and then we have the Sense Fuse pool, which is essentially it is a Fuse pool that Sense owns that enables permissionless onboarding of these yield primitives.
Thanks. And Windra, also kind of a brother in arms with Kenton and Sense, taking a very similar market with Element, and you've also made some similar decisions in terms of composing with existing protocols, such as the ones up here. Tell us a little bit about Element and about how you decided to partner with others as opposed to building certain things in-house.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me. I'm at Element and I lead growth and strategy over there. We decided to create this fixed income protocol because, as Jai said, we wanted a way for users in the network and a permissionless way for people to create fixed income products. In the past, you've seen it's all government-generated fixed income products. The yield curves are all generated by the government. We want a permissionless way for people to design yield curves, for people to design what those yield curves look like, the interest rates in the long term look like, as well as what assets should be offered in terms of fixed income. The reason that we went with Balancer was because they're specialized in that field. We want to be a value additive protocol in the space. We know where our restrictions are and where our main focuses are in terms of creating these new fixed income markets. We've been live on mainnet for about 7 months now, with our AMMs live on Balancer, and it's been great. Users are getting a really capital efficient way of buying fixed income, and we want to continue to push that forward.
Very cool. So Sense and Element, I think, are both pretty complex protocols for retail users to understand on their own. And then you layer on these aspects of, we've got this AMM, we've got multiple types of pools, multiple durations, there's going to be lending and borrowing on there. How do you think about making it understandable for the average person? Do you have to do that all in your own UI? Are you working closely with interface partners or wallet partners on top of that to make it easy? How do you approach that?
So you can go first. So we actually do work with a lot of distribution partners. We think that there's a lot of different layers of our fixed yield source that needs to be abstracted away for the retail investors to understand what type of positions they're getting into and what they're investing in. Balancer, for example, we can create those markets on top of Balancer, but we need like an easy one-click solution for users to know what fixed rate positions they're in and how much they're earning. We believe that those products are going to be built on top of us, and some of them are already starting to. But we want to stay as a protocol that still encourages composability, people to build on top of us, and that's that layer of distribution I think is very, very important. That's one of our main focuses.
And Kenton, one of the things related to that is understanding, you mentioned the rates, like what is the actual yield being earned? How do you look at that with Sense when you think about, I know you guys have done some work around rate feeds and aggregation. How do you think about how that can be clearly communicated to users?
I think that just constantly, one, being close to the users, and then two, building products from first principles has always been like a very clear playbook for most projects in general, regardless of if they have a complex product or not. I would say that fixed income is likely one of the more complex systems in DeFi to date, and so there is a learning curve that needs to be traversed. One thing that I, like me, and the various co-founders and the entire Sense team consistently remind ourselves is that ultimately, like, we are building infrastructure that will sit under the layer of like end user applications that will actually touch the mom and pops, the Bobs and Joes, etc. And so everything that we are doing is just there to demonstrate the power of fixed income, the power of the products that we're building, with the eventual goal that we won't effectively touch the end user in the end. And then broadly, I think we always want to keep education front and center, and so as long as we just have that as one of our core principles, that will allow Sense to be used by anyone. So.
Well, so I think this gives a great idea of like how you're approaching making this usable for people. But then there's risks associated with this. And Fernando, I know that when your team was working on Balancer V2, there were some trade-offs that you had to make in terms of certain token types you could support versus not support to be able to give kind of certain safety guarantees and let people know what to expect. Can you talk to us a little bit about how you decided what to support, what not to support, and very specifically, what are some of the risks of people trying to use non-standard assets on low-layer infrastructure like Balancer?
Yeah, so we were optimizing first for security and also for gas. So we had to make a bunch of trade-offs, and the most important one was, I think, to only accept tokens that are like kosher or vanilla, like everything you get, there's no tax upon the transaction, there's no rebasing, so a token like ADAI has to be wrapped to work on Balancer. But ultimately, it was, I think, the right decision. Like, it's really hard to attack a system that keeps things simple, right? As soon as you open up, you want to like treat too many cases, you're not good at any of them, and you open up a can of worms, and you risk like to be hacked. So we like spent a lot of money in audits. We have one of the biggest bug bounties, 1,000 ETH. So if anyone wants to get rich and try to find a bug in the vault of Balancer V2, feel free to try. So yeah, it's always trade-offs. I think you gotta do something simple and well, and yeah.
Yeah. And so Fuse is also fairly low level, right? And there's a lot of ways that things could go wrong in a Fuse pool. What has been your approach in terms of having this truly permissionless infrastructure? How do you approach making sure that you're guiding teams or users towards things that are safer versus less safe, and setting the myriad of parameters that are possible in any given pool?
Yeah, I think that there's two pieces to this, right? There's the financial risk A, and B, the smart contract risk, right? We'll address the second one first, right? Smart contract risk, we're doing everything we can, right? We're gonna do audits. Joey, who's in the crowd here, even wrote a new token standard, ERC 4626. That makes it so that we literally own the standard that our Fuse pools are using. We know that the tokens that are being in the protocol are safe because we wrote the standard ourselves.
Can we just like pause there, and is everybody on stage on board with 4626? Yes, awesome. Any developers out there, get on board, EIP 4626. This is how we're gonna do vaults. All right, sorry, back to you.
Yeah, so smart contract risk, we're doing as much as we can, right? That's all development work. That's what we're doing at the infrastructural level. In terms of risk on the financial side of things, that's where things get really, really interesting. Because you have this trade-off in educating and protecting the retail user while also ensuring that these systems are completely permissionless, right? And how we think about that trade-off is Fuse at its base should be completely permissionless. We should never tell a user that they can't borrow or lend an asset, or else we'll turn into the banks of yesterday, right? However, we do need to educate them and make sure that they're staying safe and not getting rugged in our platform, because that's bad for us, right? So that's where the things like the Rari risk score comes in, and we do our best to educate the users. And over the long term, I imagine that there will be many, many platforms that come along to educate the users, right? That are just independent platforms on risk analysis of various different Fuse pools.
So how much work did it take for I guess, Element, I think was like first out the gate with some of these pools on Balancer. What did it take to do that integration? How much work did you need to do, your development team working directly with folks from Balancer Labs or the Balancer DAO versus they've got great docs and you just like picked it up and did it yourself?
We really heavily evaluated some of the protocols that we wanted to work with at the beginning. Of course, Balancer was something that we saw took proactive and high measures to ensure that security is a primary focus. Likewise did Yearn. So we were extremely comfortable with having them as some of the first initial launch partners. But even then, when we have conversations with institutions, the number one question is, other than custody, it's always about insurance. And when we say, okay, well, what kind of insurance? Smart contract insurance? They say it doesn't matter. All sorts of insurance. When we have MIM markets, DPEG insurance was a big thing. Like, how do you default insurance from credit loans is a big thing. So they don't care what type of insurance is being offered as long as their principal is protected. And if it's not protected and if that level of security or risk isn't absorbed away, they'd rather just not participate at all. So that's something that we put a lot of focus on, because we believe that that's one of the big paths to adoption for DeFi.
And when you think about, for all of you, right, you've all worked with some folks on the stage to do integrations, to build products together. When you think about like what comes next, you all have an immense number of things that could be built on your protocol. What are you excited for, like, laddering up to? What are the next types of integration partners that you're looking to work with?
I think the biggest thing here is what Joey brought up earlier in his talk, right? And that's tribe launch, right? This idea of a one-click DAO is extremely, extremely powerful, right? You have all of the different DeFi primitives on this stage. You have an AMM, you have a variable lend and borrow, and you have fixed lend and borrow, right? So the future is leaning into that composability even further, right? A new project wants to come along, they'll open up a website and instantly have liquidity through Fey. They'll instantly have a place to lend and borrow. They'll instantly have a place to exchange their asset. And it really becomes the DeFi prime brokerage, right? That's what we're building together by composing this stack, is you deliver everything a project needs and more, and you make it so that they don't need to go anywhere else, right? They have everything they need up on this stage. All it takes is somebody to come and build a nice interface, and it's done.
So when you say like one-click DAO, we're not talking about like deploying like Compound Bravo governance or something like that. We're talking about one-click, full-stack financial services when you launch your protocol.
Exactly.
Okay, that's pretty cool. So what are other financial services that you can see becoming a part of this, right? We've got a few things here, but it's a pretty broad universe of financial products that you could build on top. What are some of the other things you might be excited to add to that stack?
I think that there are a few different pieces, right? You look at a DAO today, and there's 3 key pieces that leads to their success, and it's like a feedback loop, right? It starts with capital, then that leads to more contributions, that leads to value accrual, and then it starts all over again, right? So I think that we're all in the capital piece, right, as being DeFi primitives. But I think that in the future, as we head to this one-click DAO model, we'll start addressing the latter 2 pieces, right? What does it look like for decentralized contribution management tools, What does it look like for there to be communication platforms meant for DAOs? These are all part of the one-click DAO. We're focused on the financial side right now, but it's only a matter of time before all these other pieces are brought into it.
And one of the interesting things I think about this group on stage is all of you did not like rush into having a token and heavily incentivizing use of your products. You've really focused on doubling down on integrations and saying, can we find natural demand for this and real sources of sustainable yield? But at some point, right, it feels like to be competitive, there's going to need to be some token incentives, because if you don't, your competitors surely will. So how do you think about making that transition, and whose responsibility is it to incentivize growth of some of these things that are, you know, layered 2 or 3 protocols deep? Are you guys talking about jointly incentivizing stuff? Is it the top layer of the stack that's responsible, the bottom layer? Who takes responsibility here?
I can answer this one here. Sense is actually the only protocol that has not launched yet here on this stage. We're launching very, very soon, so if you're interested in following our development, Twitter is at Sense Protocol. So we've thought long and hard about incentives and growth, and we've made the intentional decision, the deliberate decision to ensure that PMF, product market fit, has been achieved by whatever metrics we have set before thinking about incentives and hyper growth. I think that there has been some chatter about hyperstructure systems, and I think that there is value in having a token and ensuring that the token is released into a properly decentralized project and that control has been distributed as well. But I think that it's just vitally important that PMF has been hit first, and then scale comes shortly thereafter. Yeah.
Anybody have a different opinion about where incentives should lie?
I can take this. I think incentives are overrated, very, very much, right? But you need them to compete, right? As you alluded to, right? So what we've developed is an easy way to wrap incentives inside of Fuse, right? That makes it easy for other projects to come in and start offering incentives, right? If Balancer wants to add incentives, they shouldn't have to go and write their own incentive mechanisms. Instead, they could just take the BPT tokens or whatever tokens they want, dump it inside of Fuse, and suddenly they can instantly start rewarding incentives, right? Fuse is a liquidity incentive manager, essentially, or it can be, right? That's one of the many functions of it. But over the macro, right, I think that we're going to start moving away from these incentive modeling, or at least they're going to evolve in how they work, right? I think we'll start seeing more escrowed deposit rewards, right? We're going to start experimenting here, because I think what's going on right now isn't sustainable for most projects, not all projects. And I think that you'll start seeing rise also of PCV based as a replacement, right? You don't need to go and spend hundreds of millions of dollars on liquidity mining rewards if you can partner with somebody like Frax or Fei to come and provide counter-side liquidity to your token, right? And you partner with us, and that's much better spend than useless liquidity incentives that attracts mercenaries.
So, go ahead.
I'd like to make a quick comment on incentives. So everyone, when incentives are discussed, everyone is thinking about juiced yields, airdrops, liquidity mining, etc. I think that one core incentive that exists that does not include token incentives is integration incentives. So Balancer and Fuse, they are incentivized to work with Sense and ensure that the integration follows through. And the reason for that is because Sense is penetrating a market that is going to pull in more capital, more volume to Fuse and Balancer. And so this is really, it touches on this symbiotic relationship that Dan coined many years ago, and it's actually amazing to see it kind of unfold. So really, heads down and integrations, I think it's the only self-sustaining moat out there at this time.
So I want to quickly touch back on one of the things you mentioned, Jay, about being able to use something like Fei as a liquidity partner and bootstrapping and doing that on Balancer. And I think one of the things that I got most excited about with Balancer V2 was the use of your vault architecture, which this is something that we don't really have in other AMMs, where it makes it very efficient, right? Fei is not the standard like USD stablecoin that is being used most broadly, but if you've got a Fei pool that is paired with, say, USDC and DAI and others that are a little bit more widely used, and then you've got a Fei pair with some other asset, people can very efficiently go from USDC through Fei to the random other asset that's paired with Fei. And that's not something that other AMMs are set up to be as composable in that way, knowing that you're going to want to frequently be doing multi-hop trades. So when you're out there after this panel talking to folks, who should come and talk to you?
So if you don't want to spend $1 million in audits, if you don't want to have a bug bounty of 1,000 ETH, then come talk to us. Like if you want to have the next generation AMM or any sort of solution that has 2 tokens that need to be exchanged, like Fei, like the PCV, if it's over collateralized, automatically you can go towards more risky assets, and Balancer handles all of that without like people sandwiching you, without you having to have multi-sigs you trust. It's all automated, all custodianless, and it like why would you do all the boring stuff that we spent like a year working on, like talking to other protocols to make sure everything is composable? There's a lot of work there. So I don't know why you wouldn't use Balancer if if you have such a
I agree.
Like a utility.
30 seconds each. Who should come talk to you?
If you're working on something interesting, I want to talk to you. There are too many forks in the space, too many boring projects in the space. If it's something that I'll find entertaining, come talk to me.
If you're interested in building a fixed income primitive, something cool, come find me as well.
If you're interested in building structured products or any products that utilizes a fixed yield source, come talk to us. We have a few products that have already been built on top of us. So, we can refer to you to talk to them, but, just open to any products that's being built on top of Element.
And if you're building something that you want to kind of partner with anybody up here on this stage, come talk to me. The Nascent team would love to help you with that as well. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.